since we are not taking up the whole sanctuary. That would be good. And this workshop is Somebody's Watching Me, Drones and Domestic Surveillance, presented by Danielle Dosa of the ACLU. So hopefully that's the one you want to come to. And she's going to be talking about drones as unmanned aerial vehicles controlled by a human operator, used by the government and private sector for a variety of purposes. Scientific research to agriculture to military operations. Domestic drone use is regulated to the Federal Aviation Administration. However, there is increasing pressure from law enforcement and some in Congress to permit more domestic drone use. Drone use creates privacy concerns, but guidelines will help protect against unreasonable government intrusion. So here's Danielle.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for being here. So it's we're kind of switching gears from the previous keynote. We're going to talk more about domestic use of drones. So again, my name is Danielle Dosa. I'm a policy counsel with the ACLU of Ohio. But we do have some literature up here you can grab after. I just want to say it before I forget about it and trip over it on the way out. Okay. So first I want to start a little bit with technology. We'll talk a little bit about technology and privacy and kind of how that relates to our lives and relates to drone use. So technology is not always a bad thing. We at the ACLU, we like technology, we're not opposed to it. And technology can be a neutral tool, can be used for good things. It can be used for bad things. So some of our good uses are iPads in classrooms for, say, children with autism, or 911 GPS tracking can help ambulances arrive sooner or know routes better. Drones were used to help fight the fires at the Yosemite Park last year to help determine where the fire was, where it was going, and how firefighters can combat that in a safe way. So technology is continually changing. It changes faster than any of us can think about, right? There's always something new coming out. So let's kind of dispel some myths about that. So how many people in this room have a driver's license? Okay, great. So at some point or another, that information is in a system and it's accessible to over 300 government agencies and over 30,000 individual government employees. So our information is out there, as great as some of it is, but how many people drive a car? Probably the same. Okay, at some point your license plate has been scanned by a license plate reader, and that information is kept somewhere, and there's license plate readers all around on the highways, in the cities, or even on hand with the state troopers, and that information is kept somewhere. And there's, depending on what city or what municipality you're in, there's different rules about how that information is stored and how that information is used. How many people carry a cell phone? Pretty much everyone now, right? It's very possible that your cell phone information has been given to the police at some point, or has been requested by the government from one of our data providers. So the truth is, we all leave a digital fingerprint. We all like technology, we use technology, but our information is going to be out there. Some people say, well, I don't use Facebook or Twitter, I don't really use my cell phone that much, so why should I care about privacy or technology uses? But you may have, a child or a grandchild or someone who does, and it's important that we protect the privacy of our loved ones, and that's what we're doing at the ACLU. So, how our government uses technology can be a big problem. The laws are not keeping up. So we're going to go through a little brief history first, okay? Our government has shown us time and time again that they're willing to skirt our rights, the Bill of Rights. We can insert whatever fear here, communism, terrorists, gangs, to skirt our rights and gather information about people. After World War II, there was this project called Project Shamrock, part of the U.S. Armed Forces Security Agency, which later became the NSA. They started collecting international telegram information coming through in search of Soviet spies during World War II. So that's where a lot of communication started being tracked and obtained by the government. Later, there's a project called Minaret. It used the information from that Project Shamrock and other surveillance data to create a watch list of suspicious citizens. You know, we can think of the 1950s, communism scare. People over the years around that included Muhammad Ali and Martin Luther King. In 1972, Nixon was impeached for Watergate, which included wiretapping. There was a huge wiretapping scandal, so we know the government was using it. In 1975, there was the Church Commission. It was a select committee of U.S. senators, led by Senator Frank Church. And this later became what we know now as the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence. This commission investigated the CIA and FBI, uncovering hundreds of instances of warrantless wiretapping and unauthorized electronic surveillance. And this was just in the 70s when we didn't even have that much technology. In 1978, President Carter created the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, called FISA. I'm sure many people have heard the term FISA. And it established the secret court to hear requests for surveillance warrants. So that court somebody from the government would come in and say, you know, we want to wiretap someone or we want to survey someone in some other way, and they don't have to inform the public. That information is not going to be public. It's a secret decision by the FISA court. So here we have in 1986, it's the Electronic Communications Privacy Act. It was amended in 1986 to include wireless data and communications. And the government interprets this to mean that once this was when email was becoming a little more popular either in the government or really big corporations were starting to use email more often. So the government interpreted this amendment to mean that once your emails are opened and older than 180 days, no warrant is required to search them. And the act has not been amended since, so it's still in use today. Once your emails are opened and they're out there after 180 days, the government doesn't need a search warrant to go online and search for your emails or communications. And a lot of us know we can even delete emails. We can try to make our email as private as we can, but the information is always out there. You know, we delete something and it's always out there. So in the 30 years, the technological landscape is very different, and it's a little scary that this has not been amended in almost 30 years. But we all know technology is changing faster than we can keep up with, and we all know Congress is moving slower than any of us can stand. So let's fast forward to 9/11. 9/11 changed everything. The Patriot Act was instituted, and what our communications coordinator office says, it's where the empire strikes back. It's one big thing it did was take a bite out of that FISA court and essentially left a rubber stamp for the government to issue warrants for wiretapping or other surveillance. And in 33 years, the FISA court has declined only 11 requests of more than 33,900 surveillance requests made by the government. So that's 0.03% of requests that have been declined. As early as 2003, there was a worker at AT&T who found a secret room at AT&T that did nothing but collect internet surveillance for the government. So that's where a lot of, some of you may have heard some of that recently, that AT&T is providing information for our government, and it's been several years. This room did nothing but collect our information. And most recently, The Guardian, which had the infamous interview with Edward Snowden, revealed details of NSA domestic spying activities, including a secret order from the FISA court to Verizon Wireless Network, ordering them to turn over ongoing phone call details, including phone calls to someone, from someone, where they are placed, when those calls are made, for how long. And this was all Verizon business customers. So the ACLU sued, and the district court unfortunately dismissed that case as ACLU v. Clapper, ruling that the program was constitutional and did not exceed the authority provided by the Patriot Act. The ACLU appealed that to the second Court of Appeals in New York. So it was appealed, and I don't think oral arguments have been heard yet. So let's move on to privacy expectations. So So when we think of privacy, a lot of us think of the Fourth Amendment, right? We have the right to be secure in our persons, houses, papers against unreasonable searches and seizures. And generally, the police need a warrant to search things. However, as we've said, a lot of electronic information can be found without a search warrant, or as I like to call them, secret search warrants issued by the FISA court. And even all of our information also isn't even that private when we think about it. So if we go to the next slide, the U.S. Supreme Court has even said third-party information we share with someone else is not private. For example, bank records, or if we forward on an email that may have private information, that's not necessarily private. And again, that 180 days comes into play. So only a subpoena is required for a lot of information, and with a subpoena is a little different from a warrant, so no information of the crime is required, only information that might be relevant to something. And it can be issued by a prosecutor or federal authority. We don't need a judge to have a subpoena issued to find some of that information. So that could be, these requests to Verizon could be subpoena for information, or AT&T, something like that. So let's get into drones. That's why we're all here. So here's some pictures of drones. There's several different types of drones. At the top there, we have a Predator drone used by the military and used by Customs and Border Protection along the borders, typically along the Mexico border. We have a quadcopter on the beach of Australia. And we also have a digital camera mounted on a police drone down here in the corner. If we go to the next slide, there's a few more drones. These are fun, but also they scare me a little bit. That top one looks like a little bug. That's a model of an insect-sized drone used by the U.S. Air Force. The large picture here is an ecologist launching a drone by hand to survey the ecology of the land. And then the bottom one is a drone camouflaged to look like a hummingbird. And I always just think about, if I'm sitting under a tree one day, I look for a hummingbird, I'm going to have to see if it's a drone from now on. So it's a little scary, but maybe that's a little extreme. So if we go to the next slide. There's a map of domestic drone certificates of authorization. So what is a certificate of authorization? There are all these areas on the map where state agencies and commercial operations are required to get special permission in order to use drones. So you can't just have a company who goes and flies drones all over the place. You actually have to have a sort of a license to operate, as we call it. So if we go to the next slide, here's a certificate of authorization. In Ohio, we have a few COAs with Medina County Sheriff's Department can use drones, the Ohio Department of Transportation, Sinclair Community College, Ohio University, Lorain County Community College. These all have COAs. And the reason academic universities or colleges have the COAs is because a lot of them have training programs. So they train students on the use of drones or unmanned aerial vehicles because it is an up-and-coming industry. So they're kind of trying to get ahead of the game with that, and they also do different type of research with drones. So why do we require them? Well, they're required for safety reasons. So drones actually have an accident rate of 7 times higher than general aviation and 353 times higher than commercial aviation. So there are big safety concerns as far as flying it near people, flying it near buildings, all that kind of stuff. And there have been 6 test sites created through the Federal Aviation Administration across the country in order to determine feasible guidelines on drone use. So we don't really have government guidelines. I'm sure you've heard that today. And the FAA is doing a lot of research to create these guidelines. This is in response to a directive from Congress to open the skies to drones in 2015. So that's why there have been, it's been a lot in the news lately. We've just seen this explosion of drones, right, especially domestically. And the FAA is kind of rushing to create these guidelines to use them. So we have 6 test sites in the country, including University of Alaska, the state of Nevada, New York's Griffith International Airport, the North Dakota Department of Commerce, Texas A&M University, and Virginia Tech. These test sites are used to fly drones around, see how they're used, how they would affect kind of people, buildings, commercial use. So, what do we use drones for? Well, we use them for military surveillance and attacks. You just heard about that. The government is already using them at the Mexico border. They started just flying along the border. Now they're starting to fly into Mexico to survey the area. And these are typically non-weaponry ones, but they're used for surveillance. Next slide is police surveillance. They're used to support SWAT teams. So the police will send in a drone in an area before they send in the SWAT team so we don't risk human life as much. We can send in a drone or an aerial vehicle to survey the area. So we think of drones as weapons a lot, but they are primarily used for surveillance, even overseas by the military. They can have high-power zoom lenses, night vision, see-through imaging, video analytics, so they can detect stuff. There's even more experiments with sensory detection. So a drone can be trained to detect a certain type of paint, say on a Humvee. So if it's overseas in a battle area and there's a Humvee covered with a lot of brush or trees or something, the drone can detect that and let the military know there's a vehicle there. So there are those uses for it as well. If we go to the next slide, it's used to survey agriculture, survey farms, survey ecologies. There's areas of nature we cannot get to, but we can use these drones to do a lot of research in that area, and that's what a lot of universities do as well. And finally, we can use them for fun. Any personal use cannot be flown near an airport or above 400 feet. You could probably see some of your neighbors. You can buy your own drone for $300, $500. Your neighbor down the street might be flying a helicopter around. Technically, that's an unmanned aerial vehicle. You wouldn't think about it, but maybe you'll buy one for your son or grandson or something, and he's flying an unmanned aerial vehicle around. So it's strange, right, to equate that to large drones by the military, but technically they are all drones, and you can even buy ones with cameras on them. Your neighbor might want to, survey the neighborhood for that. But if you are using a drone for personal use, typically they have to be in sight of you. So it's unmanned, but you have to be able to see the drone. You can't just fly it around with a camera, even if it has a live feed. You have to be able to see it. Even those commercial operations are flying it around, they have to be able to see it. But if they can't, they have to get special permission to fly it through an airspace, because it could affect our commercial aviation. So say there's a big company, I don't know, have a lot of you heard about a company down in Dayton doing drone surveillance. So it's been in the news the past year or two. They have been doing surveillance in the Dayton area as a test for Dayton police, but they ended up, there's a big uproar from the community, and they ended up not getting a certificate to use drones in the area, but they have been doing testing. But say they want to fly a drone from Dayton up to Toledo for commercial purposes or something. They have to map out the route. They have to let anyone along the route know that the drone is coming, when it's coming, how high it's going to be, how fast it's flying. So it's very in-depth if you want to fly a drone, but you can't see it, essentially. Otherwise, if you can't do that, you have to be able to be inside of it. And these are just regulations right now. Again, these are laws that are probably going to change, probably in 2015, but these are the rules that are in place now. But any of you can use a drone. I know some examples out there. There's little ones. Maybe we can get hummingbirds. You can fly them around together. Okay, so what are we concerned about? Even though they're fun, there are big concerns, right? We have big privacy concerns, increased surveillance. I think that's the biggest one. People are worried that the government is going to fly the drones over their backyards, listen in on our conversations, and it's a fear, more invasive technology, like we said. Sometimes you're not going to notice a drone. And we don't want, we oppose cameras all around, right? It's not 1984, the book. But so we worry that the government is watching. Free speech implications. What does that mean? So if we have a rally, say, and there's a drone flying around on top, it has been proven that when people are watched, they act differently. They might not speak out about something. They might not want to attend a protest, or they're going to back away from it because we have this fear that we are being watched, that information is being kept on us. So it does stifle free speech. We have these serious free speech implications. And then misuse of data. Like I said before, those license plate readers. And so the Ohio State Highway Patrol has a great policy where they, after 24 hours, they delete a lot of their information. But if you're in Franklin County, well, they keep the information for a long time. So it just depends where you are. So now, what if we have drones with cameras who are just collecting all this information everywhere? How is that information stored? How is it used? What is it used for? So these are issues that ACLU is working on combating, what we are looking into. And we also are not alone in our privacy concerns. We have some unusual allies like the Heritage Foundation, the International Association of Chiefs of Police, the National Republican Party, and the ACLU have all agreed on guidelines on domestic drone use that will help protect against unreasonable government intrusion. And the national trend so far is that, I think it's on the next slide. No, not yet. Anyways, but this session, drone legislation has been proposed in 42 states and enacted in 8 of them and still active in about 25. So what do we have in Ohio? Well, we have no current drone use, right? We have no laws in place right now. There have been three bills introduced. The first one is on the next slide. It's HB 207. So it permits law enforcement. It's in the House right now. It's in the House committee. It was let's see, where is it? Yeah, it was introduced last June. Okay, it was introduced last June in the Transportation Public Safety Homeless Committee. It has only had 3 hearings, but it permits law enforcement to operate drones for evidence and information collection after a search warrant is obtained. So that's the really important part here, is after a search warrant is obtained. Not by the FISA court, but through proper means, as the police would get any other search warrant. Or they can use it in an emergency, such as any other search they do. If there is a threat of danger, a threat that evidence is going to be destroyed, just like that, police don't need a search warrant generally to, say, enter a house, and it would be the same for drone use. Or when it is necessary for a terrorist attack, but we don't really know what that means. And we probably won't find out for a while. But it's had 3 hearings in committee. It's not really moving anywhere, as a lot of legislation doesn't. So then we have another one, which is SB 189. This is in the Ohio Senate. And this permits state employees to operate drones. So it could be the police or other state agencies using drones after a search warrant is obtained or in an emergency again. And it codifies limits on data retention, so that's really important. They can't just keep the information forever.
What would happen if a drone came by that had a camera and I gave it the finger? I mean, is that like giving a cop the finger? What if I threw a stone at it?
If you threw stone at so if you give someone the finger, right? If you give someone the finger, well, we have free speech rights to do that. We have free speech rights. But generally, right, but we can't incite violence. We can't physically threaten, we can't be threatening generally. If you throw a stone at it and hit it, well, it is someone else's property. So technically it's damaging property. If it's over your own property. So that's, I'm always thinking about that. I always think about trespass issues, right? So we have a right to privacy, or people can't trespass on our land so far above in the airspace, so far above in the airspace. But the Supreme Court has ruled, I can't remember what the case is, but flights, this has happened before, I don't know if you heard about, people growing marijuana in their yards, right? There's a plane that can fly over and take pictures, and that has been ruled constitutional because there's free airspace so far above our houses. So that could happen. But again, with certain drone use, it can't fly above 400 feet if it's like private drone use. But if you have a certificate of authorization, so Ohio State Patrol, they could fly over, right? But we're not really seeing it right now. It could happen. You know, drones are changing just as quick as iPhones. So it could happen in the future. And we just don't know. We just don't know yet. It hasn't been prevalent. We don't know the information. We don't know how law enforcement wants to use it. But because there have been cases in the past, you know, they can fly over your backyard, take images of someone growing pot, and that would provide a reasonable basis to get a search warrant to enter your home. So it could be the same thing. But again, you know, if you throw a stone at it and hit it, but it's damaging someone else's property, essentially. Or you could, for example, maybe they are trying to investigate something in the area, and you're impeding on that investigation. That can be an issue. So these are all serious concerns. So back to SB 189, if they have this data retention, if they're flying over your backyard taking pictures, it will limit how long they can keep those pictures. Or if they are flying over a protest, how long can they keep those images or a list of people who were there? That's a serious issue and something the ACLU really wants to put in place. And this also bans weapon use on drones. And again, this is just for Ohio, but we cannot, we really push for no weapon use on drones. So, you know, those drones that are used to flying and help SWAT teams, well, they can't necessarily have a gun on them. They can be used to go in and survey the area and see what's happening, but it can't be used to shoot things or anything like that. And it also establishes a reporting requirement for the operation. Typically, this means that after so many days of the drone use, they would have to report this information and it could be available to the public. But this was introduced in September and again has had no hearings in the Senate. I just don't think it's a serious enough issue right now that it's being pushed out of committee in any of the legislatures. And we do have one more law introduced into the House, HB 364. It's very similar to the one we just discussed, permits state employees to operate drones after a search warrant is obtained, which is super important, in an emergency. It codifies the limits on the data retention, it bans weapons, and it establishes that reporting requirement, which all of these, the ACLU actually is in support of these different sections of the bills, okay? There hasn't been testimony or anything, we haven't done any of that, but we do want, in any legislation that's introduced, we do want the search warrant requirement, very important. We do want limits on data retention, bans on weapons, establishing a reporting requirement. There has to be some type of oversight. We can't just have this use of drones by everyone, and we don't even know when they're being used, how they're being used. So we want these laws to be passed so we can keep track of that. You know, we can know how often it's flying over into residential areas, what it's being used for. You know, we can look at the search warrants. What are they looking for when they're using drones? What type of drones are they using? This was introduced in November. Again, has had no hearings. I think there's been hearings on one of these bills within 2014, and it's probably, I don't have hope that anything will be passed this year, but we're certainly going to push for it. So again, the national trend I mentioned before, it proposed in 42 states, only enacted in 8, still active in those 25. I think a lot of states are waiting for the FAA to take all this information from those test sites and kind of propose different regulations on drones. So a lot of states will do that. They'll say, okay, you know, the FAA, the government is proposing these regulations, these seem good, we're just going to use those. So I wouldn't be surprised if we see more legislation pushed after that. Okay, and finally, all good technology policies must exist, and they must have those lists of things that we talked about before. And we must have oversight. We must have government oversight of that. That's why we want them, right? They must be transparent. Transparency. The public should know these programs exist. We should know who has certificates of authorization, who is able to use these, whether it's the military, the government, some other state agency possibly, who is flying around and have an opportunity to weigh in on those uses. We must have checks and balances. All right, primarily through the use of probable cause warrants. That's why we have warrants. It's a check on the government, a check on the police for our privacy and our Fourth and First Amendment rights. We want probable cause to ensure that law enforcement is not going on just fishing expeditions. They're not just going to fly around our neighborhoods and around public spaces to see who is protesting, who is attending these rallies, what's in your backyard. So that's why we have this probable cause warrant issue. Okay, so database protections. Access to databases should be restricted. Information should be shared only sparingly. Data retained only as long as it's necessary for ongoing criminal investigations. So I think a lot of us probably just heard President Obama is reducing access to collecting our phone information, right? They're not just going to randomly collect all of it, so maybe that AT&T room that we talked about is going to slow down its use a little bit. I don't know if it is, hopefully it is, but we really need protections on that. And that's what the ACLU is fighting for. So without transparency and clear guidelines in use of technology, it's not a question of if the government will abuse their power, but it's a question of when. Time and time again, we have seen this. And our most recent federal spying scandals are another example, right? The whole Edward Snowden issue. We've realized that there is a lot of this domestic spying, domestic surveillance. So that's why the ACLU is really pushing, what can you do to support this legislation or improve restrictions on drone use? Well, you can become a member of the ACLU. We do have pledge cards on our table. You can check out our website. Our website does have great information, acluohio.org. You can check out our national website that has a lot of information, aclu.org. And we can just continue this conversation. That's why we're all here today, to learn about this, to get that information out to the public. So thank you for coming. That's just a brief overview. Sadly, I don't have more information to report to you on legislation. I wish I did, but it's because we don't have any. So maybe next year we will be able to talk about all the great legislation that has been passed. And you can contact your legislators, tell them about these House bills, these Senate bills. So the literature I suggested before, we have some up here. It looks like this. It has all three of those bills listed on it and just some other privacy risks that we talked about today. If you want to take that and share that, keep it, share it with the public. Does anyone have any questions? Yes?
Who or what criteria determines what an emergency is?
Who or what criteria determines what an emergency is? That's a great question. It is a case-by-case basis, such as it is now. When police can enter a home without a search warrant. Well, those general rules are, okay, is someone in danger, is someone's life being threatened, they can enter that way. Is there a serious threat to evidence being destroyed? Generally, they can enter without a search warrant. But what an emergency is, it's not spelled out, right? It's not spelled out in these bills. So that's going to be where government accountability comes in. That's going to be where we look at the situation likely after it has happened to say, okay, was this constitutional? Was this really an emergency? Did they need a search warrant?
So the police could rationalize.
Right, yeah, but we want to be able to trust law enforcement to do that. A lot of times it's right, sometimes it's not right. And that's why we have our checks and balances. That's why we do have a court system. And we don't know yet. We don't know yet what an emergency is to use a drone because we're just not there. We will get there, we're just not there yet. You have a question? Did you have a question?
Oh, yeah. For the states that have passed laws, do you know what governmental agencies, if any, are restricted to the use of drones? Is it all law enforcement agencies, or could it be anyone?
Is it okay? So the question was, what agencies can use the drones, essentially? Right. So it is law enforcement, but again, we have the universities, and some of them are technically governmental agencies with public universities like Ohio University or Lorraine Community College. They do have use for educational purposes, some other type of research purposes. But we know who have these certificate of authorizations. We have access to that information. So we can go look right now who has them. Who's going to have them in the future, I don't know. When these laws are put in place, there may be a lot more issued because the government will feel more comfortable having issuing more certificates of authorization if we have laws in place. So, yes, you had a question.
The requirement in legislation that would be only when necessary to thwart a terrorist attack, and that seems always to be something that can be abused so much. And it depends whether you're talking about imminent or you're just talking about people gathering to protest. Protesters could conceivably be identified in that way.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Right, so she's asking about the thwart of imminent terrorist attack and how that can possibly be abused. It certainly could. There is the argument, proponents of a lot of drone use have used the argument lately that with the Boston Marathon bombings last year, that if drone use was available, they could have, or other type of cell phone tracking was available, they could have prevented the killing of the MIT police officer. You know, if the government is able to just tap into a cell phone or scan that way, or we could use drones that way to survey the area, survey a protest, survey a large gathering to thwart an imminent terrorist attack. And we just don't know yet how it's going to be used. We're not there yet. Because large gatherings are always a threat, right? They're always considered a threat. And there's no definition of what it means to thwart a terrorist attack or imminent threat. So that will have to come in the future. Yes, in the back.
Yeah, a couple of days ago, a federal appeals court declined to hear the case of the 3 Americans who were executed without trial overseas by a drone. Considering that was the exhaustion of appeals, is it now legal for the federal government to execute Americans as long as they're outside the country?
Okay, so the question is about the exhaust of appeals of the 3 people who were killed overseas by a drone, and if the United States can just, kill people overseas. And I can't really answer that question clearly. Morally, we know that's wrong, and I think there's a lot of information we don't know about how drones have been used overseas by the military. That's why we want this oversight. That's why we want these laws put in place. So I don't think I can answer that question really. I don't think that's what the court said. Basically, the court said the appeals are exhausted. It doesn't give free rein for the government to go do that, but we also have to put in place laws to restrict use, to restrict government use, to make it known to the public what even the military is using drones for. And so I think that's really the important part, is we need to have government oversight of that use. Yes.
Doesn't the ACLU have a lawsuit about those killer drones ongoing now? I thought I read something about that.
I'm not sure if there's a lawsuit by the national organization. I'm just not familiar with all the lawsuits. We do have a lot of lawsuits. You can go on, if you want to know all about the from our national organization is headquartered in New York. We also have a Washington office, and then we each have a state affiliate. So we're from the Ohio affiliate. But if you go on the national website, ACLU.org, you can actually find a list of all of the ongoing litigation and past litigation, all the lawsuits from that. But I don't know the exact lawsuit concerning that. Any other questions? Yes.
I, as an individual, for fun, that was one of the uses of the drone. Put together a drone from a drone kit, and I would not need a certificate of authorization. That's for other purposes, but so I could do that without any authorization.
Yeah, so you could fly it around, but again, it cannot be flown above 400 feet. It can't be flown near an airport, and it has to be in sight. So you can go out into a field and probably fly it around without any problem. You can fly it around. It can't be dangerous to other people, of course. You can't run it into people. You can't trespass on other people's property, right? You can fly it so high, but we can't fly it into someone's yard. It's even considered trespass if your neighbor throws a ball onto your property and goes and gets it, that's trespass. But so there's issues like that. But no, you don't need a certificate of authorization just to fly it around like that. Yes.
But you could have a camera on one.
You could have a camera. You could. I mean, you can walk around your neighborhood and record things. Yeah, you had a question.
Have the utility companies weighed in on it at all?
Have the utility companies weighed in? I don't know. I have not seen any information about that. I've never seen information on utility companies, but we have agricultural companies who use it. Others, ecology studies have used it. So I wouldn't be surprised if we do see that.
Like about electrical lines.
Yeah, I can certainly see that in the future. Instead of, we want to reduce the risk to humans, so maybe we can send a drone to check out, see if a line is down or a line is spraying, something like that.
Or they might run into one.
Yeah, they definitely could. So that is definitely an issue. Yes, you had a question.
March 10th, 2007, I was at an 8-day peace vigil down at Public Square, and there was witnesses there. And there was this light that came over Key Tower, and it was checking us out. It's on YouTube. It made CBS Evening News. And I don't know if that was a drone or whatever that was, but it was making weird movements.
Oh yeah.
And I was wondering now, if the government would have a drone and not tell you it's a drone, could you sue the government for panic or fooling people or playing mind games?
So the question is, if the government's using a drone and you don't know what it is, could you sue the government for that if it is tricking people essentially? Probably not. Right now, we don't have those regulations in place where there's the recording requirement, right? So we don't know. We don't know what it was used for. We might not have access to that information. If it's on record somewhere, we might be able to get that information. But right now, we don't have those requirements for the drone use and what it's used for. But unless it starts causing chaos, probably not. Unfortunately, it probably wouldn't be successful.
Right, but okay. But if I would put something up in the air and induce panic, I would be charged with inducing panic.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
If you use that to induce panic, just like if you yell fire in a movie theater, inducing panic, you just can't do that. Any other questions? Yes.
As the potential for surveillance of this nature becomes more and more a risk, more people are going to be in a position of needing to be defended. Do you see more organizations like the ACLU? I mean, the ACLU can't do everything. Do you see more organizations like that, independent organizations defending people's rights coming up because of all of these changes in surveillance?
Sure. So the question is, do we see more organizations defending people's rights from use of these drones? And I absolutely think we do. We already have organizations out there who work on privacy issues, whether it be cell phone tracking, getting information from that, these license plate readers, wiretapping. We have organizations that are trying to promote public accountability for the government, putting government information out there. And I think we will see a lot more of that. The ACLU will always be here defending rights and protecting privacy rights. But I think as technology is evolving, I think organizations will need to evolve to keep up with that as well and defend our privacy rights, protect people from use of these drones or other uses from companies even. So, but I absolutely think we will. Yes?
Is there any current limit, or should there be a limit on the ability of the government to correlate database information with citizens?
Okay, so should there be any rules in place essentially about government taking this information to put it in it's like our digital fingerprint, right? So that's when we talked about data retention, that's what we're talking about. If the government is collecting data from drone use, there needs to be limits on what that can be used for. and how long that information can be kept. So we don't want it to just be kept. We don't want to know people are at this protest and that information can be kept, because if somebody keeps going to protest for the same thing, okay, are they going to get on a terrorist watch list? Are they going to be on a no-fly list? Those are questions we have. So that's why we really want data retention restrictions, if that helps answer your question. So about, building a profile on someone, I don't think we know the answer to that question yet. Can they use the information? Yes, the government uses information all the time to build profiles on us, but we want the oversight on that. That's why we need laws in place. Yeah, go ahead.
To what degree can they use health information now that the CARE Act was passed for law enforcement purposes?
To what degree can they use health information now that the ACA is passed for law enforcement purposes? Well, I don't really know the answer to that question. I don't know the rule to that or what has been used so far, but I know President Obama has said signing up for healthcare is not going to affect, say, undocumented immigrants. They are not going to use that information to go out and track people who are undocumented. I hope to think, I'd like to think health information is not going to be used to track people in other ways.
The fact that he gave an exception would seem to suggest that they are going to use it for other purposes.
They might. I just don't know the answer to that question. I don't know what kind of information they're collecting on people. But that is a concern, and it's just something we don't know yet. The government really hasn't released information. And I don't think the Healthcare Act has been around long enough for us to even know what kind of information is being collected yet. Maybe we'll know next year. Any other questions? Yes?
I've heard of these license plate readers, but I'm not clear as to what the purpose of them is. What do they do with this data? Do they collect it in case there's a bank robbery, for instance, and there's a getaway vehicle? Or is it just general surveillance of movement of the citizens in the town?
So the question is about the license plate readers. And the answer to that is they are generally used, when a license plate is scanned, it's generally used to find out if that person has a warrant out for their arrest or if that vehicle has been stolen. So if a vehicle is reported stolen, they scan it, they find out if there's a warrant, they'll pull you over. If it has been indicated that it's a stolen vehicle, the police can follow that. So that's mostly what it's used for. But we think about it. You can go on our website. And Alex, do we have the scanner papers out there?
Oh, they might be gone.
Okay, so we do have some. You can go on our website and find out about the license plate scanners. If you go to our privacy section. But what if we think about, cameras being on all corners? What if they know, okay, we go to church in the morning, and then we go to the bank, and then we go to, some social gathering. We worry about that information being tracked and, our routes around being tracked. And those are the concerns we have. So there's, the aggregation of that data. That's why we also want to push legislation to limit the use of them. We really do like the Ohio Patrol's restrictions that they delete the information 24 hours after it's gathered. But, like Franklin County Police, well, there's no, they don't have any restriction, they don't have any rules on that, so they can just keep it. So that's why we want regulations in place for that. Any other questions? Yes?
If law enforcement knocks on my door and says, we have a warrant to search your interior of your house, do I get to read the warrant? Do I get a copy of the warrant? What's the deal?
Sure. So the question is, if law enforcement knocks on my door and says, I have a warrant to search your house, do I get to read it? Do I get a copy? You can absolutely ask to read that warrant. That was the big issue of NAPFI, Ohio. If you're familiar with that case, they wanted to search a woman's house for someone else who's hiding, right? and she wanted to see the warrant. They didn't have one. They left, and then they came back to her house and said, "We have this warrant," and they wouldn't show it to her, so she grabbed it and stuffed it in her shirt. Then they wrestled her to grab it out, so she never got to see the warrant. So that's kind of how this all started. You can absolutely look and read the warrant, because the warrant is supposed to specify what they're looking for. For example, if they're looking for a person in your house, they can't look in drawers because a person cannot fit in a drawer, right? So it is limited in scope, and they're generally limited in scope. But yes, if the police ask, they can read it. What they'll likely do is hand it to you and walk by you and start their search.
How do we know what a warrant looks like?
How do we know what a warrant looks like? Good question. It could look different per district or municipality, however they type them up. But there are certain requirements. They have to be specific in nature. They have to say what the address is, where they are, who, if they're looking for a person, who they're looking for. So there have to be details in the warrant. But you can do a Google search and actually find some examples if you're more interested. Or check out our website, ACLUOhio.org. We do have search and seizure. You can find that issue page on our website and check out a lot more information. Okay, I think we have time for one more question. Yeah.
Medea Benjamin mentioned that she's getting, harassed and trying to go to Canada and other places. There's a law that says that the U.S. Border Patrol can search people within 100 miles of the border. The TSA are also now setting up shop and train stations and things like that. Is the ACLU doing any work against those types of invasions?
We're always doing privacy work in general. The national office does a lot more work with, say, a TSA or Border Patrol. So I encourage you to check out our website for that. I am not as familiar with work on the TSA. But please check out our website. Thank you so much for coming. These questions were fabulous. Keep up the conversation. Very good. Thank you. And please come take some of our literature. Take that information with you.